Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today, in our One Piece size scaling series, we'll be trying to establish a solid perspective on the sizes of humans and giants in the One Piece world. Now right off the bat, when most people picture a tall human, they immediately think of NBA players. And that's for good reason. I mean, just look at the numbers. LeBron James stands at 2.06 meters, Shaquille O'Neal at 2.16 meters, and the tallest NBA players in history, Gheorghe Muresan and Manute Bol, reach a towering 2.31 meters. For perspective, those heights are actually right in line with the height of most door frames. Residential doors usually sit around 2 meters tall, while commercial buildings tend to go up to about 2.45 meters, made extra tall to allow for accessibility and equipment clearance. So, whereas regular people can comfortably walk through a doorway without even thinking about it, those NBA giants are constantly at risk of bumping their heads, or in some cases, even overshadowing the frame entirely. Now, this gives us a really useful anchor when trying to grasp the heights of One Piece characters, because even some of the so-called regular humans in the series are massive by real-world standards. You see, characters like Captain Kuro, Smoker, and even human form Rob Lucci are all taller than LeBron. They're literally NBA player height or beyond. And it doesn't stop there. As a matter of fact, early series villains like Don Krieg, Crocodile, Arlong, and Enel are all over 2.4 meters tall, even characters you might not expect, like Bon Clay or post-time skip Frankie, stand above 2.31 meters, meaning these characters would literally tower over the tallest NBA players in recorded history. So when you're casually watching these characters interact on screen, just remember, you're looking at people who, in our world, would be absolute physical anomalies, giants among men. And, just as a fun fact, Monkey D. Dragon himself falls into that same category, standing at about 2.56 meters tall. So maybe, just maybe, Dragon should have considered an NBA career instead of this whole revolutionary leader gig. Who knows, he might have found greater success there. Now going further, let's put this into real-world perspective. In our world, there just aren't many people who stand above NBA player height. In fact, the tallest human in recorded history, Robert Wadlow, was only about 0.41 meters, taller than the tallest NBA players ever, standing at an incredible 2.72 meters tall. Now again, just to visualize that, remember, those NBA players we mentioned earlier are roughly the height of a standard doorframe, but Robert Wadlow, he was basically the height of the inside of a small one-story residential house. Most single-story homes have a minimum interior height of around 2.7 meters from floor to ceiling, meaning Wadlow could quite literally touch the ceiling just by standing upright. You see, that's the kind of scale we're talking about. And yet, what's crazy is that in One Piece, there are tons of characters who casually exceed even that height. These are people who would be taller than the tallest human being to ever exist, and who quite literally wouldn't even fit inside a normal house that you and I could comfortably walk around in. For example, former Fleet Admiral Sengoku stands at 2.78 meters tall, Garp, his fellow legend, is 2.87 meters tall, and Doflamingo, the original 3 admirals, and even Blackbeard are all over 3 meters tall. That means every single one of them is taller than Robert Wadlow himself, the tallest man in human history. And it doesn't stop there. Even characters you might not consciously think of as giant figures, like Brook and Jinbei, are also taller than Wadlow. Even Kinemon and the Pirate King himself, Goldie Roger, stand above that record-breaking mark. So again, keep in mind that most small residential homes have ceilings around 2.7 to 3 meters tall. Every single one of these characters I just mentioned would either brush up against that ceiling or outright tower past it. In other words, if they tried to step into your living room, they'd have to crouch down, or maybe not even fit inside at all. Now, as a step above this, let's talk about the outside height of most single-story residential houses, because of course that's going to be taller than the inside height. You see, you have to account for things like the foundation, the thickness of the floors, and the height of the attic or roof structure. Together, that brings the total exterior height of most one-story house to somewhere between about 3.3 and 4.6 meters. Even most two-story homes only go up to around 7.6 meters, though some, depending on design, can be a bit taller. Now this, again, gives us another really useful benchmark for visualizing the scale of One Piece humans, because when you start lining up their heights against actual buildings, things start to get a little wild. You've got characters like Pika at 4.7 meters, Katakuri at 5.09, Diamante at 5.25, Whitebeard at 6.6, Kuma at 6.89, Kaido at 7.1, Jack at 8.3, and Big Mom towering at 8.8 meters tall. So you have human characters, keyword human, who are literally taller than not just a single-story house, but even most two-story houses you see in everyday neighborhoods. Now admittedly, this is where things start to get a little tricky, because while comparing to something like a doorframe is easy for anyone to picture, when we start talking about the height of entire houses, it becomes a lot harder to mentally visualize. I mean, we all know what a two-story building looks like, but actually feeling that scale in your head compared to a person takes a bit more effort, unless you're standing right in front of one. It's the same deal when I say that many of these characters are taller than even most giraffes. The tallest recorded giraffe in real life was about 5.88 meters. Now most people know a giraffe is tall, but it's still hard to really imagine standing next to one, let alone realizing that Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom would actually tower over it. So let's simplify it a bit. Let's start using an average human, such as yourself, as the reference. The average adult is about 1.7 meters tall. That means if you stood next to Katakuri, you'd only reach his upper thigh. Next to Whitebeard, you'd be around his kneecaps. And next to Big Mom, you'd barely reach her upper shins. In other words, to them, regular humans are practically toy-sized. And even if you scale up to an NBA player like LeBron James, who's 2.06 meters tall, it doesn't make much difference. Next to Katakuri, he'd only come up to just below the waistline. Next to Whitebeard, he'd reach about mid-thigh. And next to Big Mom, he'd barely clear her knees. So you see, these aren't just tall characters. These are beings so massive that even real-world giants and buildings start to look small beside them. But that's only the start, because so far, I've basically been talking about more or less regular humans, with maybe a few fishmen and oni sprinkled into the mix. But you see, things get much crazier when we step into the territory of true giants. Because in One Piece, giants don't just exist as a myth or exaggeration, they're canonically real, and their average height sits at around 20 meters tall. Now let's try to wrap our heads around that for a second. To help you visualize it, think about everyday objects. For instance, a standard US school bus is usually around 10.5 to 13 meters long from front to back. So, if you lined up almost 2 school buses end to end, that's roughly the height of an average giant in the One Piece world. Imagine that. 2 entire buses stacked upright just to reach eye level with one of these guys. Still, even that can be tricky to really visualize in your head, so let's bring it back to human scale like before. The average adult human, around 1.7 meters tall, and even someone tall like LeBron James, at 2.06 meters, they'd both barely reach the ankle of a 20-meter giant. Not the knee, not the shin, just the ankle, or the very lowest part of the shin. For perspective, you, next to a One Piece giant, is like a tiny kitten or a small dog standing beside you. They can nudge your ankle, maybe brush your leg, but they're completely dwarfed by your size. That's the kind of scale difference we're talking about here. So when you see characters like Dory, Brogy, or Hyrudin on screen, remember, they're walking skyscrapers compared to any normal human being. Now, within the giant race, we know there are those who carry the ancient giant bloodline, and as a general rule, they're at least 3 times the height of a regular giant. That means we're talking about beings that stand around 60 meters tall or more. For example, Oars Jr. is confirmed to be 60 meters, while the original Oars reaches an even more staggering 67 meters. And characters like Harold and Loki, though their official heights haven't been revealed yet, are heavily implied to be in that same range, since they share the same ancient giant lineage. Now, if you've ever watched Attack on Titan, it might be a bit easier for you to picture just how massive 60 meters really is, because that entire series is designed to make you feel the overwhelming scale of the Titans. You see, the colossal Titans in that story, the biggest ones aside from the founding Titan, are exactly 60 meters tall. So you can imagine Harold and Loki standing next to one of those colossal Titans. They'd be about the same size. But here's the thing, even with that comparison, most people still have a hard time truly grasping just how huge 60 meters actually is. So let's slow down and break this down from a few different angles to help you visualize it properly. First, let's compare to real-world structures. The Statue of Liberty, without her pedestal, stands about 46 meters tall, and high-voltage transmission towers, the kind you see stretching across highways, usually range from 45 to 65 meters in height. So an ancient giant would literally be as tall as one of those towers, or taller than the Statue of Liberty herself if you took her off her base. Now for something a little more grounded, let's look at this through a human anatomy lens. On average, your full hand length is roughly 11% of your total height. The palm makes up about 55% of that hand length, and the fingers make up the remaining 45%. So if you scale that up proportionally to a 60-meter ancient giant, someone like Loki or Harold, their hand alone would measure over 6.6 meters long. Let that sink in for a second. That means their hand, just from wrist to fingertips, is taller than most one-story homes, and even taller than many two-story houses. And it doesn't stop there. Their individual fingers, the index or middle finger alone, would be over 3 meters long. So to put that in perspective, a single finger from an ancient giant would be taller than you, taller than me, taller than LeBron James, taller than every NBA player in history, and even taller than Robert Wadlow, the tallest man ever recorded. A single finger from Loki or Harold would quite literally eclipse the floor-to-ceiling height of most residential houses. You see, that is the kind of scale we're talking about here. When you hear ancient giant in One Piece, you're not just talking about a big person, you're talking about a walking skyscraper, something so massive that even one of their hands could crush a building, and one of their fingers could cast a shadow taller than the tallest real-world human being. But let us zone in a little and really put the icing on the cake. Take a look at this panel of Harold clashing with rocks. Now, I absolutely love this panel, but I think most people don't truly grasp just how physically impressive that scene is, especially for rocks. And the reason is simple. Most people don't actually understand how enormous a 60+ meter ancient giant like Harold really is. You see, newer anime fans might have an easier time visualizing big characters if they think of Attack on Titan. In that series, most of the regular titans are about 15 meters tall, while the Beast Titan stands around 17 meters. Now for those of us who grew up on Naruto, like myself, when we think of giant summons or creatures, our minds usually jump to the Chunin exams, when Naruto first summoned Gamabunta, towering above the trees and facing off against Shukaku, the One-Tail. Both were massive, easily dwarfing everything around them. And as we know, all the tailed beasts, or Biju, are roughly similar in scale. Even Kurama, the Nine-Tails, who's often portrayed as the largest, is shown as still pretty relative to Gamabunta in overall size. Now here's the cool part. We actually know Gamabunta's canonical height. It's 17 meters. And the other two giant toads used by Naruto, Gamaken and Gamahiro, are just slightly larger, standing at about 19 meters. So whether you're picturing the Titans from Attack on Titan or the giant toads from Naruto, you already have a solid reference point for how massive those beings are. They're enormous, towering over buildings and trees, true titans of their respective worlds. But with that understanding in mind, let's circle back to Harold, specifically to his sword, because this is where things get even more mind-blowing. A sword's length must obviously be proportional to the height of its wielder. In most real-world cases, the standard sword length is roughly half the user's height. Of course, there are variations. Some are shorter, some are longer, but half the height is a pretty reliable baseline. Now, Harold, being an ancient giant, stands at least 60 meters tall, which means by that same ratio, his sword would be at least 30 meters long. Let that sink in. Harold's sword alone is nearly twice the height of a Titan from Attack on Titan, or the size of multiple Biju stacked on top of each other, and he's just swinging that thing around like it's nothing. And rocks. This man who's casually clashing with Harold is parrying blows from that monstrous weapon as if it's just another day. And that's not even the wild part, because even 30 meters might be a lowball estimate. Because you see, that half-height rule usually applies to one-handed swords, but for larger, two two-handed greatswords, which is the type of sword that Harold has been demonstrated to have. The length can easily extend up to 80% of the user's height. That would make Harold's sword potentially 48 meters long or even more. So think about that. Rox D. Zebek, who by the way is not significantly taller than Goldie Roger, who was only about 2.74 meters, was casually parrying a blade that could be anywhere from 30 to nearly 50 meters long. Like, wow. And to be clear, I'm not bringing this up to power scale anyone. That's not the point here. The point is that without understanding the true physical scale of the people and the objects involved, you just can't truly appreciate how awe-inspiring scenes like this really are. These clashes aren't just strong versus strong, they're mythic in scale. You're witnessing a colossal being, taller than the Statue of Liberty, swinging a weapon which is about the size of a 10-story building, and clashing equally with a guy who is likely taller than, or at least comparable in height to the tallest human in history, but who is still shorter than the mere index finger of the giant who he is clashing with. Like, that is insane. Now, at this point, apart from just being mind blown about how big these characters are, it's actually really useful to understand why grasping their true scale helps you to better appreciate the story itself and the in-world logic that Oda builds around it. You see, the size of these characters doesn't just make them look cool, it changes how you should interpret their powers, their transformations, and even how their devil fruits function in practice. Take Zoan devil fruits for example. They allow a user to transform into an animal, and that transformation usually comes with a size increase, because naturally, most animals are larger than an average human. But here's where things get a little crazy, because in One Piece, the average human we're dealing with is often already way bigger than the real-world animals they're supposed to be turning into. Let's take King with his Pteranodon devil fruit. In real life, a Pteranodon's standing height only reaches a maximum of about 2.5 meters, but King, even in his base human form, already stands at 6.13 meters, which is over twice as tall as the creature he transforms into. And remember, that's before he even activates his full Zoan transformation. So when you picture his transformation, you shouldn't be comparing it to a real Pteranodon. You should be comparing his beast form to his own already massive base height. Otherwise, you're underestimating the scale of what's really happening. The same thing applies to Jack and his mammoth devil fruit. The largest recorded mammoth species in our real world, the steppe mammoth, could reach up to 4.5 meters tall and about 7 meters long, not counting the tusks. But Jack, in his base human form, already stands at 8.3 meters tall, almost twice the height of the biggest mammoth that ever walked the earth. So when he transforms into a mammoth, you can't just think of it as Jack becoming the size of a real mammoth. No, he's starting from a base form that already dwarfs any real mammoth. His full Zoan transformation scales from that foundation, making his final size and mass something far beyond any real-world comparison. So you see, once you understand just how large these characters really are, the story's visual scale, and the power behind every transformation hits way harder. You stop seeing Zoan forms as simple animal copies and start recognizing them as monstrous amplifications of beings who were already massive to begin with. Now I know some of you might be wondering, since we've been talking humans and giants, why I haven't brought up San Juan Wolf, the colossal member of Blackbeard's crew who towers above even the ancient giants. After all, he's confirmed to be an unbelievable 180 meters tall. Well, to answer your question, relax. There's a reason for that. You see, this is only part 1 of our One Piece size scaling series. In this part, we're focusing specifically on humans, giants, and ancient giants. But in part 2, we'll be diving into the creatures of One Piece. That's where we'll really get to talk about beings whose sizes start to overlap with mountain ranges and seafaring leviathans. So rather than bringing San Juan Wolf into this discussion and throwing off the scale entirely, I'd rather save him as a proper comparison point for when we're talking about those larger than life creatures. That way, his size won't just feel like an outlier, it'll make sense in the broader context of the monstrous beings that roam the One Piece world. So don't worry, we'll get to him soon enough. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.